This week's show brought to you by the NBA is back! It's back! Hopefully I didn't lose all of you listeners if that intro is too loud. Brian, I may actually go back and post if it is too loud and turn it down. We've had complaints before with intro being too loud. Anyway, this is the Boxscore Geeks show. We're doing it on a Monday, so it goes live right before the NBA season. And in perfect fashion, we've got my favorite segment of the show back, the Boxscore Geeks portfolio. Our own Patrick Minton went out to Vegas and put some money down, so we're going to talk about that. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. For those of you watching the live show, if you notice more facial hair, I've decided to do the playoff beard until my son Daniel is born, so expect this to get scruffier in the upcoming weeks. Anyway, as mentioned, I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. This is the Boxscore Geeks show. Co-host Patrick Minton is back. Say hey, Patrick.
Hey, Patrick.
All right. You can follow him on Twitter as NBA Geek. And as always, we are produced by our own voice of God, Boxscore Brian on the Twitter. Brian Foster in your heart. Say hey, Brian.
Oh, how's it going, guys? Yeah, I'm so ready for the NBA like everyone else, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be a great season.
All right. So we're going to discuss two pieces that went up this week, primarily the one that, well, I say go up this week. The 2016 Boxscore Geeks portfolio will be up by the time this show is on iTunes and Stitcher and all that. If you're watching live, it's not up yet, so you get your sneak preview. So Patrick went to Vegas, put down a bunch of bets on the NBA season, not everything. You know, in past we've done predictions on every team, whatever. That's not how this went. Patrick, you basically did looked for what you thought were good values, and we're going to discuss those. And then just for fun, this Monday, because NBA season is upon us, and we didn't have time to do another top 10 list. We've been loving them, but I named a few more of I'm calling them sports strokes, and this is something you did, Patrick, at the very start of the Boxscore Geeks. We named a lot of things in the realm of thinking fast and slow, a lot of the logical fallacies. It's something I love, and I may expand upon. So we'll discuss those two pieces, but let's discuss your bets, Patrick. So. I'm just going to go through your spreadsheet and your piece, but actually before that, for those of you that'll be reading tomorrow, Patrick, you discussed a few strategies to how you bet, and I'd like you to talk about those because I think it's important. I think a lot of people misunderstand being savvy in terms of knowing what to bet on isn't the same as making intelligent bets.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of this goes back to just the principles of professional gambling. So if you've ever been a professional gambler, and I was for a while, not a sports gambler, but I was a professional gambler for a while. I played poker for a while. One of your key principles is that your bankroll is extremely important so the core concept of being a professional gambler is that you have some edge, that you know something that the opponent doesn't know, right? In sports, it's because you're better at placing the spread line or the money line. In poker, it's because you're a better poker player than your opponent or whatever. So the key component is the most important thing is you always have to be ready to keep playing. So the simplest way to boil this down is let's assume you found an idiot that would flip coins with you and he would give you 1.2 to 1, meaning whenever you win, he'd give you $1.20, and whenever you lose, you would give him $1. Like with this player, and imagine this guy will, no matter what you do, he'll flip coins. He'll always flip coins. He'll never refuse to flip the coin. So the concept in this really simple argument is that the most important thing is that you, no matter what happens, you want to always be able to keep flipping coins with this guy. You can't do anything that would ever jeopardize your ability to keep flipping the coin. So the last thing you'd want to do is bet your whole portfolio on a one coin flip, because even though you're a favorite, you might lose that coin flip and then you can't flip coins with this guy anymore. So you should always take a certain maximum amount and say, I'm never going to bet more than this, no matter how good. Even if the guy says, okay, I changed my mind, I'll give you 4 to 1 on this flip. You should never put too much of your bankroll down because you want to be able to keep flipping coins. Even if you have a really bad streak and you lose a few key bets, you need to be able to keep flipping coins.
And the point you obviously as with most things, even the sports tropes will name, they are usually rooted in some thing that's already named, and what you specifically called this was gambler's ruin.
Well, it's called Gambler's Ruin, and it's also called the Risk of Ruin. So the concept of Gambler's Ruin is even if you have an edge, let's take a hypothetical scenario where I put down $1, and every time I win, I put down a little more. And even if I have an edge, over time I will eventually go broke if I just keep if I keep betting more each time, right? Because eventually I'll bet too much and I'll get really unlucky, and that one time I'll lose too much. This is why, for example, when you if you talk about blackjack, right? There's some simple-minded strategies of, okay, whenever I win, I'm going to bet more, and then at the end I'll have a little extra edge, because if I think that I'm going to have equal amounts of winning streaks and losing streaks, and my winning streaks, I win more than on my losing streaks, because on my win streaks, I always increase a little bit. Of course, the flaw there is that if you lose the last one of the winning streak, you lose a lot of money. So the concept is always okay, after 5 times you go back to 0, or whatever your sort of core principles are. And the simplest way to think of Gambler's Ruin and Risk of Ruin is that you just need to limit the amount of money. You need to diversify. So even if there's one bet on the board that's better than all the other bets, you shouldn't put your whole bankroll into that bet. You should diversify, and you should only have 10% of your bankroll, or if you're a professional gambler, actually a much smaller number in that one bet.
And for what it's worth, we can't avoid talking 538 on the show. In his book, Nate Silver talks about Bob Bulgaris, one of the most famous NBA bettors. And the way he built his bankroll initially was he basically put an $80,000 bet, which was his entire bankroll, on the notion that I believe it was either the 2001 or 2002 Lakers would win it all, because there was a point with injury to Shaq or something where the odds in Vegas were just completely off.
And I remember that season. That was a great bet, but go on.
But to that point, to your point, and for what it's worth, Nate Silver even brings up, had he bet 40,000, then there was a point, for instance, when the Lakers are going into Game 7 against the Portland Trail Blazers in the playoffs, where you could just take that 40,000 and do a complete hedge and say, I'll bet even money that the Blazers win, and if I'm right, I walk away even, and if I'm wrong, then my bet that the Lakers win everything is intact. But that is not what happened, and so I really like the point that you put out, because I feel too many people get caught up in we were right, we beat Vegas, and not enough people think about if I actually had $1,000, what would be the right way to bet this $1,000?
I think for us, the classic example was 4 years ago when we started this, and the Knicks over-under was at 51. They went on to win 17 games, I think, that year. But it was very obvious to any advanced basketball analytics that the Knicks bet was crazy good value. And it wasn't just us. It was the people who did Shone, and a bunch of other people were just like, wow, that Knicks under is an amazing value. But we didn't stick the whole portfolio in there, because we're like, well, we can't really afford to put the whole portfolio in there, because if they're wrong on this one bet, then we can't bet on any of the other good bets that are out there, right? And I think we capped it at 1,000, which was, I think, at the time, 20% of our portfolio, which even now kind of makes me a little nervous that we put so much into that one bet. But it's just, no matter how good a bet is, it isn't worth your whole bankroll.
I am curious about one thing. You did talk about making plus EV bets that emerged later, but said you didn't want to do any hedging. For instance, what you mean here is you didn't want to, for instance, bet on the Houston Rockets to win the division and simultaneously bet on the under on them, because those are contrasting.
Because they're mutually exclusive. But I'll return to this later. But the thing is, things can change later where you have more information, and then a plus EV bet may emerge later that just coincidentally happens to hedge you. And it's very similar to what you were just talking about with the Portland Lakers thing with Bulgaris. Like, he might have totally said, wow, this bet on Portland to win is actually plus EV, so I should take that. The fact that it happens to hedge a bet that I had previously is actually kind of irrelevant, because that previous bet is a sunk cost, right? If the hedge is plus EV, you should always take it. But by definition, before the season starts, it's kind of impossible for me to believe that both the under on a team and the bet to win a division for a team are both plus EV. That's very, unless the Vegas odds are really freaking weird, it's very hard for both of those bets to be plus EV at this point in time, at the one point in time. So,
gotcha.
we shouldn't be betting those because if you do that, all you're really basically doing is giving the house 10% of your money, because if you assume you wash, you've lost on the rake.
And by the way, that's the last point I'll give before we actually break down the bets is one thing I think people miss about Vegas is that it is a market. So what you're just saying, your essential point is saying the key to winning in Vegas is managing the market, right? Taking good bets as they come along. So it's entirely possible that betting against the Warriors is good, even if you think they're a good team, because the price gets too high or the odds get too bad. And what you're just saying is it's highly unlikely that the same price of two opposing products at the same time will be a good bet.
And we'll actually get to that probably right away, and when we're talking about the Pro with Golden State. But most of when I'm talking about hedging here, mostly what I'm saying is you shouldn't take bets that are completely mutually exclusive, because then you're just throwing
at the same point in time. Because you're saying
right.
you might later, but you're saying
later,
at the same point
later when the odds have changed or when the information has changed, and I'm retreating the bet that I already made as a sunk cost, I might totally do that. But when I'm plopping down my initial preseason bets, it doesn't make any sense to pick two mutually exclusive bets, because that's literally just making an investment that has a guaranteed negative 10% return.
Yes, exactly. Because I don't even want to get into rake, but Vegas basically does.
Yeah, well, because of the rake, because if you assume you've picked two mutually exclusive things, and you assume you're going to win one and lose the other, you are by definition doing nothing other than paying rake.
And yeah, so for those of you who don't know, who don't gamble, basically Vegas does charge a little amount for every bet. That's how they
Not always, but usually. Yeah. Vegas will give you some even money bets.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't know enough about, because I don't bet enough, but I mean my general understanding of that. And I may actually ask you about odds, because I always have to look them up, even though I've got them.
Well, it's an interesting side point before we get started. So I found out that the Venetian also had over/under numbers, and a lot of them looked really attractive to me until I realized that, unlike the Westgate, where the Westgate always gives you -110 on every over/under bet, the Venetian was doing it different. It was setting the over numbers, but then also changing the odds depending on what you chose. So, for example, you could take, if you wanted the Lakers over, the bet wasn't -110; it was like -135. And if you wanted the Lakers under, the bet was like +130 or something like that, or even +105 or +10. Like, they didn't always line up. And what that essentially does is it makes the math like just absurdly hard to figure out, because on an over/under, it's really hard to nail down your probabilities. It's not enough to just say, well, I think the Lakers are going to be, around 29 wins. You have to be like, okay, I think the Lakers have an X probability of being over 26, and because I'm only getting paid -135 on it, and it just made the math crazy. And essentially what it made me say is, well, I'm sure there's some bargains to be found in here versus going to a place that's always going to pay me -110. But you know what? Fuck you. I like easy to process information, so I'm not going to give you my money, because what you're trying to do is hide your odds behind a complex formula.
There's an entire tangent I can get on about how video games with in-app purchases do this exact screwy thing where they make you do algebra in your head. But let's
and also, arguably, if you really have your spreadsheet with all these things and you really have these odds down, arguably that's the inefficient market that you can exploit, because that's where it's hard to figure out, meaning all the other rubes in the market are doing things wrong. So if you're the one doing it right, you probably have a bigger edge in that market, if we assume that those Venetian lines are moving according to where the money's going.
Oh yeah. So actually, this is what I wanted to talk about, lines moving, and this is the very first bet. So your very first bet, you have two of them, but they're the same bet, kind of. Yeah. You have the Field versus Golden State to win the NBA title. And so what this means, I'm assuming, right? And you already explained it, but just in case I'm wrong, you're saying someone other than the Golden State Warriors is going to win the NBA title, and you bet respectively $300 and $100. The reason I said 300 and 100 is one of the odds you have is +120, which means you get, for every $100 you bet, if you are correct, you get paid out $120. Mm-hmm. And then the other one you have +130. So it looks like the odds changed because, right, as I mentioned,
they changed from one day to the next. So my first day, it was at 120, and this is the first time I've ever seen this. Actually, It's actually extremely rare for Vegas to give anyone an opportunity to bet on the field, because that's generally how Vegas makes money, is by betting on the field, right? But at least I've never seen this before in the NBA. Maybe it's common in other markets. I don't know. Um, but
Yeah, well, actually, it makes me sad.
it's interesting that it's not phrased that way. The real phrasing, and it's the same thing. But the real phrasing is, the question is, will the Golden State Warriors win the NBA championship? Yes or no? And I picked no. Right? For no, you get plus 120, and for yes, you got whatever the converse of that is. I don't want to do my math right now. And I picked no, and we'll get into that in a second. But then what happened was, that was Friday, and then on Saturday I went back to the casino, and I just happened to notice that the odds for no went up from 120 to 130. So I was like, well, if I liked the bet yesterday, I like it even more today, because nothing has really changed with regards to, the like it's not like the Warriors got better from Friday to Saturday or that the field got worse. So I kind of I doubling down is the wrong word, because it was only $100, because again, we had the rule, only 10% of the portfolio in one bet, no matter how much you like it. So I only had $100 left to put into that bet. So I put another $100 into that bet.
But
Sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, like I was going to say, that's the whole point of market, because I hate articles that say we beat Vegas, here's how much we would have made, because that's not true. You might have gone to Vegas when the odds were everything you have in your post.
Right.
And as you're putting that $100, they say, we're sorry, we can only take 50. If you want to put another 50, it's this, or the odds might have changed. I had that happen when I went out. I went out to Vegas during March Madness one year, and I was really excited about some bets, like the Atlanta Hawks were looking good. And the odds when I left, like, I looked on my laptop as I was flying to Vegas, looked great. And I ended up not putting a single bet once I got out there, because all of this money flowed into Vegas for March Madness, and all of the same people changed the market. So I don't tend to like articles unless they're like you, Patrick, that are, I went out to Vegas, here's how I spent my money, because I find they're misleading, because there's no guarantee you could actually have gotten that price.
It's interesting you bring that up, because there are a couple of bets I didn't make for precisely that reason. I kind of liked Atlanta over until I saw the numbers they wanted. The Golden State Warriors over, I almost didn't place, because it went from 65 to 66 and a half. I loved it at 65. I like it at 66 and a half. Is great. I would have hated it at 68. It was still, like, I still placed it, but I don't feel as great about it as I did before. So I don't know if you want to talk about why I placed what bets yet or not, or if we still want to talk about market. One of the things that I think it is good to point out is that Vegas isn't always placing a line at a specific place because they think that's what's going to happen. The classic example is the Knicks line 4 years ago when it was at 51. I don't think anybody in Vegas thought that the Knicks were going to win 51 games. I don't think anyone in Vegas, I don't think any odds maker anywhere thought that line was realistic. But that line was there because so many people were betting the Knicks over. And at some point, they have to keep moving because it was so popular to bet the Knicks over. At some point, the casino was going to say, okay, well, we know that, the Knicks probably aren't going to win X games. But at the same time, we don't want to take a bloodbath if it does happen. So let's try to get some money on the other side of the line so that we know that we're making money. Because as long as they're paying out both sides of the line, Vegas is guaranteed to make money.
And by the way, Patrick, I apologize for doing a producery thing. Maybe I'm wrong. Brian, you can tell me if I'm hearing things. It sounds like you are very excited and keep hammering your desk, and I'm actually hearing that in mine. And I don't.
Trying to make my point.
But okay,
I'll try to stop doing that. So at some point, Vegas is probably looking there and saying, "Jesus, we got $10 million on this side of the Knicks. If for some reason the Knicks have a miraculous season, we're going to take a bloodbath. So let's move the line in order to make it attractive to people that want to take the Knicks under, so that, because ideally Vegas wants 50% on both sides, and then they just cash in 10% of all the money that was bet, and they just don't care, right? Ideally, Vegas just does not care whether a team goes over or under, and they're just going to collect 10% of all the money that got in there. It's just like easy money for them, right? And it's
banking basically, which is ideal. And by the way, I don't even think we have to go that much in depth on, like I said, your first bet. You explained the market change, so you liked it even more, and then you explained why you did 300 at plus 120, you did 100 at plus 130. The only reason you did 100 was because you had a hard fast rule. And by the way, I do want to stress to anybody that does any, not even gambling related, though I would argue things like insurance and the stock market are essentially gambling. Sorry. Having hard, fast rules for yourself are really important to your exact point. You don't want to lose all of your money. But I don't feel the field versus Vegas is that controversial because I mean, this last year even showed it. They're the heavy favorites, and essentially they had two times, right? I mean, Portland didn't ever really have a chance, but they did manage to, I think, pull out one win, two wins that were kind of interesting, that were kind of unexpected because of an untimely injury. Oklahoma City almost took it away from them, and then of course Cleveland finally did. It's like, if you're the favorite in, I think the math would be really easy. You might actually hear me typing in the background. If you're an 80% favorite 4 rounds in a row.
Oh, there's some math in the article that is basically exactly this. So the math I used is, let's assume that the Warriors are 95% favorite in the first round. Then they're a 90% favorite in the second round. Then they're an 80% favorite in the third round. And then finally in the finals, they are a 70% favorite. Now, those are pretty crazy numbers. We don't usually see numbers like that in any playoff series, maybe the first round. But other than that, you don't usually see favorite numbers quite that big in the NBA playoffs, especially not in like the conference finals. For one team to be an 80% favorite over the other in the conference finals is pretty unusual. And for one team to be a 70% favorite in the finals is also pretty unusual. So given all those probabilities, if you do the math, it works out that the Golden State Warriors will win the championship 47.8% of the time. But my bet assumes that the field is a dog. And even in this crazy optimistic scenario I've just spelled out, the Warriors are a dog. So that makes my bet hugely plus EV, right?
Oh yeah, I think I just did the math you said. I did too. I did 80% across the way, which that's ludicrous. And I think 80%, by the way, is, at least in the playoffs from what we've seen, that does seem to be like the upper bound for the most lops, the 8 versus 1 seeds. That does seem to be
right. But to have it in the conference finals and the NBA finals,
exactly. I think that's nuts. So I'm saying 80% across the board in all rounds would put your bet at 60-40 in your favor for the taking the field. And yours is a little crazier, but like I said, I disagree with it. But that's still an easy bet, which is, I think, what, 58. I think you like you said, you have the math, but it's like, so yeah. You said it's a 57% bet, which is still.
So I think that and this is ignoring, the possibility that the Warriors have devastating injuries and don't get home field advantage or don't make the playoffs. I mean, it's not completely. It's like, what ballpark it? What would you put the chances are that both Durant and Curry got hurt?
It's not. I mean, it's not out that far out of the ordinary, because we've seen, like, the Clippers this last season. We saw like 2 injuries, right? We saw Griffin and Paul both. Boom.
Yeah. And I think only one of them has to get hurt in order for you to say, well, the Spurs are just as good, right? And if both get hurt, suddenly there's like 3 teams that are just as good, right?
Can I ask you a question, by the way, unrelated? Did Vegas actually give the Spurs the respect they deserve this season? Because usually Vegas doesn't, and it's like an easy bet to take over 55. What did Vegas have the Spurs at?
It was 56.5 when I was there.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I didn't want to touch that with a 10-pit bowl, because
really?
if you ask me how many games you think the Spurs are going to win, I'm going to say 57. So I didn't want to touch that bet with a 10-pit
and then what's worse, to your point, is if your 10-1 bet, we'll talk this in a second, but you put a bet on the Rockets winning the division, which I think is outlandish, but I think you got the right price for it. But Popovich, if the Warriors are head and shoulders above, if they win what you thought, we'll talk this in a second too. You also put an over on the Warriors at 66.5, so you think they'll win 67 plus games. If the Warriors are sitting at 65 wins and the Spurs are sitting at 52, and the Spurs are second in the West and top of their division by 5 wins, for a fact Popovich isn't going to give a damn about resting his stars and giving up 3 games at the end of the season. So I think I think if the spread between what the Spurs likely are and what the Warriors likely are wasn't as disparate, I think I would disagree, but I think you made the right call.
Yeah. So to continue on the Warriors, what's interesting is that I took the Warriors over at 66.5, along with this bet on the field against the Warriors. So at first
But that
glance, you might be thinking, well, Patrick, you just violated your rule because one bet is betting for them and the other betting against them. However, it doesn't violate the rule because they aren't mutually exclusive scenarios. As we just talked about, like even if I assume the Warriors win 70 game and then they're 80% favorites all through the playoffs, the bet on the field is still a plus EV bet. So the two scenarios aren't mutually exclusive at all.
It happened last
And
year, right?
it pretty much happened last year, exactly. So really, what this it's kind of tangentially related to a sports betting concept that's called middling. Middling is when you find a sports bet where you can win both sides of the bet. A classic example is you buy some team at -3 because you think they're a favorite, and then 2 days later, the line moves crazy because something happened, and 2 days later the line goes crazy, and now it's -6, and you're like, well, that went up a lot, so I'm going to take the other side of that bet now. So now you've got one team at -3 and the other team at +6, which means there's 2 or 3 points in there where you win both sides of the bet. If the other team wins by 4 or by 5, you win both sides of that bet. And that's what's called middling. This isn't quite like middling because there's actually kind of a huge gap here. It's actually kind of trivially easy to win both sides of this bet, but it's kind of a similar concept. It's basically saying I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive at all, even though they look like it on the
Oh,
surface.
I mean, this is the Billy Bean quote, the "my shit don't work in the playoffs." We've always known that the regular season is this entrance criteria to this other tournament, and we know for a fact. I've mentioned the show a few times now. It's Adam Conover's Adam Ruins Everything, where he talks about how the best team doesn't typically win, and end of the year for lots of sports. Basketball tends to be a little more fair, right? The best team in the league does tend to have much better shots, but football, baseball, I never see it. Funny stat that I looked up this year that may or may not be true for baseball, but I know is 100% true for hockey and basketball, which is the team with the current record for the most wins when you combine regular season and postseason did not win a title in their respective leagues in NHL and NBA. It's thanks to the Warriors this last season because obviously the Chicago Bulls with 72 wins had it at one point.
Yeah.
And then my other favorite team, as an example, is the Colorado Avalanche upset the Detroit Red Wings in the playoffs to take that.
The Giants and the Patriots, like, was it 7 or 8 years ago? I mean,
NFL for sure.
The Panthers last year. I mean, this happens all the time, right? So being the best team of the regular season probably buys you the best chance at winning it all, but it by no means guarantees it, right?
But your back of the napkin math is perfect there, where you're like, that gives you like a 40% chance of winning, which is fantastic. We discussed the election season a little, where we were talking like first past the goalpost. Of course, you would like to bet on that person with the 40%, but this isn't a U.S. presidential election. Being the 40% when the rest of the field is that, you don't need to just be the best out of that. You actually have to beat everybody else, which may or may not happen.
Right.
All right, let's go on to.
Sorry, this actually is going to give me plenty of opportunities to sort of accidentally hedge, right? Because now I placed this bet on the field, but that doesn't mean when it comes time to the playoffs, if the odds are great to bet on the Warriors to win their first series, I'm still going to place that bet because my bet that I'm quote unquote hedging against, it's a sunk cost. I don't care about that. Like, I'm still going to take every plus EV bet on the Warriors that I see later.
And we might get back to this piece I wrote, depending on time, where I named some tropes, and then you've been doing this for years now. Obviously, one of the biggest topics that we bring up in basketball and sports is sunk cost. I'm debating if I want to just say, when I write it down in the big list or whatever, if I just want to say sunk cost fallacy, if I want to name it something specifically. But I love that you keep bringing that up, because to your point, you took $4,000 out to Vegas, you put it down, and now you're saying that money is gone. Any future
I own a bunch of pieces of paper. I don't own any of that 4,000 anymore, right?
Yes. I mean, any future bets you make are made irrespective of that. The question you have to ask on any future bet is, are my odds good?
Right.
All right, so let's actually talk a few of these. We don't have to do a ton of time. Let's talk the Boston Celtics. The over-under was at 52.5, so you think they'll win 53-plus games. You got negative
Nope,
110
nope.
odds.
We got the
Oh,
under.
what's up?
I
Oh, you
took
took the under. Oh,
Yes.
I misread that. Thank goodness, because
No wonder
Patrick,
you were all mad at me. You're like, what are you thinking,
was like,
Patrick?
yeah, this was an interesting one
It's
because
interesting. I copied it down into our shared spreadsheet wrong, but I bet the under.
thank goodness that was why
Yeah.
I was gonna have words with you on the show
So
because
yeah, the thing about this is, I think that Vegas is kind of overselling Al Horford here. We like Al Horford, and Al Horford's a good player, but the thing is, we also liked Jared Sullinger, and he's gone, right? And I just don't think. I think Horford's better than Sullinger, but I don't think Horford is like 5 games better than Sullinger.
well, also don't
right?
forget they let Evan Turner walk. That my complaint is I would have been perfectly fine with the Al Horford pickup as an upgrade had they kept Evan Turner, because then what you're doing is you're adding that extra piece to a good team. But what they basically did is the one place that they had a glut currently, it seemed like to me, was bigs, right? They had a bunch of young, talented Jared Sullinger. I don't know if it's Sullinger or Sullinger, but Jared included. They had him and a bunch of other youngs, and that was where they had a glut, and they probably wanted to keep their wings bolstered, and they let Evan Turner out the door, signed Al Horford, and let Jared Sullinger walk, and that was like a weird Jenga move where I think the net effect is it probably cost him a win or two.
Yeah, I think it's probably a wash. I think they won 48 last year. I don't see a big improvement. I think it's probably 48. Like, I think Marcus Smarts gets a little better, because he's young and improving. Kelly Olynyk probably goes from terrible to not quite so bad, and on, right? But I don't see a 5-game improvement anywhere. And so it just seemed like an easy under to me.
Well, like one of their really good players is Amir Johnson. He's been in the league 11 seasons. Maybe I'm crazy on this because he's not actually that old, but Avery Bradley looked like he had started declining, even though he's in mid-20s. So that
Well,
was
he was always. I always thought he was pretty overrated to begin with. So.
Ooh, interesting.
I mean,
it's. I think I agree with you where we do give some credit to aging, but especially with Al Horford, who is an older player. They've got some of their most productive players. Al Horford.
We're gonna circle back to age soon.
Okay. But Al Horford and Amir Johnson are two of their bigger hitters, and they're a little older. So I love this bet. Thank goodness that was one of my complaints, Patrick, and it was a typo. So good. You're a glutton for punishment, Patrick, but I think I agree with you. Philadelphia 76ers over under at 24.5. They won 10 games last season, right? But I think this is all right.
I'm gonna go over. It's kind of a history of Boxscore Geeks. We've gone over on this team 3 times now. Probably would have been 4, but we didn't bet last year.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. But
I forget.
I mean,
what's our
one
track record on that? Because I know you got one of them right. It was like super close.
Our first year we looked like geniuses when they opened up 3-0, but then obviously they regressed to the mean really quickly. So we got the over the first year. The second year it was a push, and then the third year we didn't bet because it was we didn't go to Vegas. This year I'm betting the over again. This year, so the first year was definitely sort of on this category of, well, they're a bad team, sure, but 16 seems crazy low given that they have some NBA talent back when Evan Turner was still on the team. Not Elton Brand, but Spencer Hawes was still on the team. It's like, these guys aren't good, but they aren't like, high school players. So, and 16, like, it's really hard to lose that many games. To only win 16 is actually really hard. So we took the over that year. Then the next year was kind of more of the same, but then the next year it looked like the tank was in full, like it was just in full grind mode. They just got rid of every player that could play, and they were only playing kids that were like 20, 21 years old.
And if I'm not mistaken, I seem to recall Arturo said this. I'd have to go back and look through the box scores or popcorn machines, but it did seem like that team also seemed to put on the brakes in the fourth quarter every game. It was like
last year especially,
obvious. Right? I didn't watch it last year, but was that true last year as well? Where
it seemed to me that there were a lot of games that were. So here's my thing. This year, my bet is it's not so much based on okay, no team could possibly be that terrible. It's more based on, okay, they actually have some NBA veterans playing here. They actually have some guys who look like they can play basketball for them. They just don't look that bad, even with the injury to Simmons. And then there's also an element of, I think Brett Brown is actually a pretty good coach. But if you looked at like the last 2 minutes of the fourth quarter last year in tight games, Brett Brown often very suspiciously did not act like a guy who was a good coach. And I'm not going to say he was outright tanking things, but I think there were a lot of fourth quarter scenarios where he didn't care about winning, but he was using things as teaching opportunities. Like, let me try this out and see if like my players can do this kind of things, rather than doing absolutely everything you possibly need to do. Like, rather than running the play, your guys have down stone cold because you need those points or whatever. He'd be like, well, let's try this other thing out because let me see if my players can do this under pressure. I think he was doing a lot of things like that. So there was a lot of games where it was like, eerily suspicious how a 7-point lead turned into a 3-point deficit in the fourth quarter.
And I mean, there's a lot of high variance stuff to bet on too, but I'm fine with this. Joel Embiid. I disagree with your assessment, Brian. I don't think he's actually looked that hot in the preseason, but
well, maybe he has numbers, but he's the eye test. He's looked good.
Yeah, get out of here, Matumbo. That
and T.J. McConnell also. He had a great rookie year.
They actually have some reasonable NBA talent, and by reasonable, I don't even Gerald Henderson is not a good player,
right? But
he's not.
He can play, right? He belongs somewhere on an NBA roster, right? He's not a good player, but he's not like some undrafted, untried guy from the D League that they're just giving a shot to, right? There aren't going to be any. So what's going to happen is. There aren't going to be any games like there were last year where it was just clear that the men were just wiping the floor with the kids. There aren't going to be a lot of games like that. It's going to be more like there's going to be a lot of competing, and they're going to lose a lot of games in the fourth quarter, but they're not going to get blown out of the building by 20 every night, kind of thing. And because it's a long season, there's going to be a lot of variance. I think they're going to win 26, 27, maybe up to 30 games, depending on what Simmons is like, because rumor has it he's going to actually play. And we'll see. I mean, we're going to sweat it all year long, and that's going to become a common theme. And then the other thing is, it's clear that for better or worse, management doesn't actually want to lose this year. So we're not going to see the kind of crazy shenanigans we saw the last couple of years with like some really suspicious games that look like thrown games, because they want to win.
If you buy conspiracy theories with Adam Silver getting a vetted NBA presence. Now, I think Colangelo is the wrong presence, but whatever. If you buy the conspiracy theories that Silver basically came in and said, this is unacceptable, you cannot keep doing this. If you keep doing this, you're out, and kind of came in and via the other GMs, other owners, actually forced that hand, I think you're right, where even if Colangelo wants a top draft pick, that's fine, but he can't do we are going to guarantee the best odds at that draft pick at all costs. All right, so I agree with that one. You bet two here, same side of the thing. You bet that the Rockets at a 10-1 clip would win the division. We actually discussed this pre-show, but just so we can get through all of our bets, I'll sum up our logic, which is if we think the odds are 1 in 10 that the Spurs, for whatever reason, possible implosion, there's some rumblings that LaMarcus Aldridge, despite the fact that we think, or at least I think he looks fine. I think he looks totally fine in that team and worth the money. Mm-hmm. There's some rumblings he's not getting along with management. Of course, Pau Gasol is ancient. Tony Parker is declining. Kawhi has had injuries in the past. That you're basically just betting if there is a 10% chance that enough things hit the Spurs, and the Rockets play well enough, they can come in, and I think that is perfectly reasonable. I think you got a great price for that. And then the over/under, to same converse, is the over/under on the Rockets is only 44. I didn't realize it was that low because I have been kind of anti-Rockets. I think people are much higher on them. Andrew Sutton was really high on them based on the preseason, but 44 wins out of that team does not seem unreasonable at all, given that they have James Harden and some other good players.
So this is a weird one because they were a 56-win team 2 years ago. And then last year they won, was it 41, and missed the playoffs. And so basically what this bet is about is,
41 made it as the 8th seed, right?
Right. So what this bet is about is, which because it was mostly the same roster. There was some small differences, but that 56-win win and that 41-win team were mostly the same roster. So what this bet is it's saying, well, which one do you think is closer to the quote unquote real Rockets? And my thought here is that first of all, I think Clint Capella is going to kind of open some eyes this year. I think we both kind of agree on that. We think that Clint Capella is going to more or less be as good as Dwight Howard was in terms of efficiency. But as you have pointed out, losing Howard still hurts. But I think some increased minutes from Clint Capella and some increased performance from Clint Capella will make up for some of that. I also think there's a good chance that Ryan Anderson will fit well in the D'Antoni system. There's a good chance that they simply play better defense because they just Bickerstaff did not have them playing good defense at all, and a lot of that is just coaches improve team defense. By being better coaches, right? We've seen that coaches don't have a huge impact on player performance as a general rule for a one individual's player performance, but they do have a big impact on team defense, and they have a big impact on wins and losses simply by choosing which players to play and give minutes to. So even if a coach doesn't particularly turn doesn't turn carbon into diamond, he still might be better at sifting through the muck to find the diamonds, and he still might be better at just playing the right players and the right combination to be effective in a team defense. So I think D'Antoni's going to make that difference. All of it to me equals probably 48 wins. That's where.
By the way, to last year's point, which is kind of funny, if you look at this, it pains me to say that this was true, but it was about like the first 10, 15 games of the season. They were horrible, and it was McHale the coach that got ousted. Yeah. McHale gets ousted, and I've actually mocked Daryl Morey because he went on Quora, and they were like, "Why did you fire McHale?" And he was just like, "Well, we felt bad about it, but we had to make a change." And I basically went, well, if you were going to fire someone for the debacle that was the start of that season, the person that got the team Ty Lawson, and it seemed insistent on Ty Lawson getting minutes, might be the one I would fire. But yeah, essentially, if you take out the first 15 games of that last season, then they look like a 50-win team, which is more than fine. Right. And if you think that sure, the loss of Dwight Howard's going to hurt, but you said Capella and some other stuff. If you think that they've at least treaded water at less than 6 wins, which I think is perfectly reasonable, we like that. All right, so glutton for punishment, Patrick. I don't know if you, I didn't put the script up, so I don't know if you watched the video, which I don't have a complaint with. But we did our top 10 questions for the NBA season, and one of our questions was, will the Minnesota Timberwolves stop breaking Patrick's heart? Yep. And this might not be the case because you took the looks like a 5-1 bet on them taking the division. Very similar bet. Do you think there's a 20% chance the Oklahoma City Thunder implodes? And that seems, for as much talent as that team has, I think they are ripe for implosion.
Right. Or the Jazz, right? The Jazz is the other factor.
Oh,
there,
yeah,
right?
Jazz do look
so
crazy.
I actually think this is going to be a really tight three-way race this year. But if I had to pick them, I'd say the Thunder probably, and then the Jazz and the Timberwolves pretty close to each other. After that, I think we'll get into this in a second, I guess, what I'm talking about. But I think you're right. It's basically it's a bet on the Timberwolves being a little better than expected, and the other teams not quite being as good as they expected. And does that happen 20% of the time, basically?
I think the scary part for the Timberwolves, and the day that this happens or doesn't happen, we'll just know, is if they foolishly give up on Rubio, because there's no way they get equal value. If they trade Rubio, they did not get equal value back. I almost guarantee it. And if I'm wrong, I'll be happily wrong.
I'll be happily wrong too. And the thing is, if they perform as well as we kind of think they will, then that likelihood goes down anyway, right? I mean, the more they win, the less likely it's going to be that they'll even try to make a trade like that. At least during this current season, what happens in the next offseason might be totally different, right? I think it's clear that the Timberwolves would like to trade a point guard because they have 4 on their roster and they don't need them. I think they would love. I think they'd love to trade Tyus Jones. I doubt they want to give up on Chris Dunn yet, so I think Tyus Jones would probably be the one that they most would like to trade. But they don't need 4 guys. I'm not actually sure why they kept George Lucas 3. He's always been terrible, but he's the 4th guy, so I don't expect him to suck up minutes anyway. So I think it's clear that they would love to trade a point guard, and I think if the right package for Rubio came, he'd be more than happy to have Rubio be the one that they trade. But like you said, that kind of scenario seems unlikely. It seems unlikely that anyone comes along with equal value for him. So there's questions about this team, and the big one is who the hell's going to shoot the threes, right? But the team just has great improving young talent and has added some really good bench pieces. So I mean, Karl Anthony Towns pretty much looks like a complete beast. I think it's safe to say, I don't know if this sounds controversial at all, but I think it's safe to say that at this point in Anthony Davis's career after 1 year, and at this point after 1 year of Karl Anthony Towns is the better looking prospect.
Well, don't forget this hilariously, I meant to look up Anthony Davis and I automatically typed in Anthony Towns because apparently Anthony Davis is yesterday's news. Don't forget that despite looking amazing after his first season in the NBA, Anthony Davis was already showing signs of what we were worried about, which was injury. He only played 1,800 minutes, and he's already injured in the preseason. I don't know what the odds on this are, but it's entirely possible that Anthony Davis plays his entire career without cracking 2,500 minutes in a season because he's yet to do it, and he's getting more and more beat up. So, yeah.
So, I mean, it's basically Karl Anthony Towns looked amazing in his rookie year, and then the more I've seen him in the preseason, he just looks ridiculous in the preseason. And the preseason doesn't mean everything, especially at the team level, but it certainly means something at an individual player level. It's got pretty high correlation with the regular season if you look at the way one player performs. Teams don't correlate because coaches are trying out players that they don't care about winning, so they're trying out players that wouldn't normally play, and they're trying to do things in systems they wouldn't normally do. But what a player does in the preseason is very often indicative of what they'll do later, and Towns just looks crazy good.
Oh, I love Towns is one of these few players where, like, if you're not a team with enough of a bona fide star, and Jokic doesn't count enough for me, like, I trade the entire Nuggets roster for him.
Yeah, I think you would trade the rosters of most teams for Karl Anthony Towns.
Oh yeah, and by the way, Andrew Sutton gave a nice note. You're keeping the Halloween theme. You're in an office, and I'm assuming it's got automatic lights, so it is now dark there.
Yeah, sorry about that. It does have automatic lights, so whatever. I'll be spooky for Halloween.
Exactly, I love it. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which just so we can get through all of them. This seems pretty easy to me, given, they got rid of George Hill and some other stuff. The Indiana Pacers under at 45.5 wins. You know what? This is just a platform for me to get something out. I do not get the freaking love of Paul George. I completely buy that Paul George looked like a talented young player with a great upswing. I completely agree that had he not gotten that horrific injury in the Olympics or international play, he might have been the star. But he has never been the star people think he is. And, I love the people at B-Ball Breakdown, but they had him listed as their top 10 in the NBA. And it is absurd to think that Paul George is a top 10 NBA player yet.
Well,
and
okay.
I don't. Okay.
Let me counter that. So remember when we bet the under on the Pacers and they went on to win, 55 games?
Yeah.
And a big part of that was they started ridiculously hot. It was maybe 30-5 or something like that, right? And a big part of that was that Paul George was playing like an MVP. And not just an all-star, an MVP. He was playing at an insane level. So I think he was definitely on the track to be that perennial all-star great player.
I agree with that. Like I said, his young numbers, he looked fantastic
right.
going.
But then he did get injured, right? It happened. And he hasn't been the same player since he came back. Even though he has scored the same number of points, he hasn't been the same player. Now, so for me, what this bet is essentially the Pacers swapped out Hill for Teague, and Vegas thinks that's a wash. I don't think that's a wash. I think Hill was underrated. So that's all it really is to me. They're just a little bit worse than they were last year. The big concern for me is what if Paul George bounces back and what if Paul George is getting strength in his leg and starts to become the player that he used to be. And if that happens, then I'm going to lose this bet, to be honest. But I'm not super.
Maybe. I mean, don't forget, they also let go. So last season, the we're going to get in trouble here for saying this. The two best players on the Pacers weren't Paul George. They were George Hill and Ian Mahinmi. They let both of those players out the door. Now they turned George Hill into Jeff Teague, which, like you said, Vegas thinks to wash. We think that's a downgrade. So if they let 14 wins out the door, even if you think Jeff Teague brings back in 7, which we don't, that still leaves them, Paul George could turn into the star people think he is, which would be like a 13-win player.
Mm-hmm.
That means he would have to completely make up for the loss of Ian Mahinmi. And even if we think that can happen, which some people do, I don't agree with them.
I think it could happen, but I'm not concerned about the scenario.
Yep.
Let's put it that way, right?
All right, so we already talked the Houston Rockets over. This one, Patrick, I enjoyed because it was just so low, but it does make me chuckle. The Los Angeles Lakers over at 26.
This is the first time I've ever bet the Lakers over in the history of this portfolio. But honestly, the Lakers over under was one I never wanted to touch previously because of lots of questions and mostly because of the presence of one man, Kobe Bryant. So the simple formula that this started with, I think Arturo said this on Twitter, no Kobe plus no Brian plus Luke Walton equals plus 10 wins, which seems about right to me, right? And if they won 17 last year, that puts them at 27. And so that's before we even think about, okay, did they improve the roster a lot? And I think they did improve the roster a little bit. Lul Deng is probably overrated, but he's still a totally competent NBA wing, which is not something you could say about any of last year's wing players. Jose Calderon is old, but as a backup, he's perfectly fine. He can still shoot, and he doesn't turn the ball over.
Timothy Mozgov, one of the most overpaid
also just
contracts, but he's an above-average player.
He can play, right? And it doesn't look like they have a lot of incentive this year to try to lose. I don't think there's going to be anything like that.
And by the way, something that helped you out inadvertently, Patrick, is it looks like Ji Yanlin is asking to be bought out. It doesn't look like he's going to sit up.
He wasn't going to play. That's why he wants to be bought out, right? He thought that he was going to play 25, 30 minutes a night and get like all this, like he was going to be able to sign huge marketing deals in China because of all the exposure. And he's not, because Luke Walton is not an idiot, so he wasn't going to play. So that's why he wants out of the contract. And I think the Lakers were more than happy to let him out because they also realized, okay, maybe this is completely wasted $8 million if he's not going to play, right? He's not going to sell us jerseys in China and stuff like that. So,
all right, that was pretty easy. Next one, I like this as well, although I'm trying to remember. I think we talked a little bit about this on last week's show with Andrew. Washington Wizards, the over-under is at 43.5 games. You like the under. I think last season were they a 44-win team? So if you think they've regressed a little, that's more than fine. And I'm trying to think if they did anything.
Yeah, this is kind of one of those ones I almost didn't want to touch this at all. I just kind of wanted to fade this. But the more I thought about it, it's like I could totally see this team winning 43 games, 44 games. But for the life of me, I cannot picture any sort of realistic ideal scenario where they win 45 to 50 games. I just can't do it. Like I'm trying to put the pieces together. Who has the breakout season? Who does it? And I just don't. I guess the only variable is that if Bradley Beal suddenly has a breakout season, that's the only way it happens. But I mean, this team is basically Otto Potter, John Wall, and Marcin Gortat, and then it is a house of cards after those players, right? And John Wall is still recovering from a surgery, right? He's still not ready. He's still not greenlit. I don't think he's going to play in the beginning of the season.
Oh, interesting. So, I didn't realize that. That's actually huge.
I think or at least a couple weeks ago it was questionable. I don't know if it's still questionable now, but I think that everybody overrates Bradley Beal, and therefore everybody underestimates what a huge problem it is if John Wall is injured. Marcin Gortat is on the wrong side of 30. I think this team, I just can't see this. I cannot see what this team does to win 48, 50 games. So I was like, well, it seems like the under is a decent bet, though.
Yeah, and it's worth. They did actually pick up Ian Mahinmi, who we just talked about, but I'm looking at Basketball Reference, who actually has started listing injuries. Yeah, like you said, John Wall is recovering from a knee injury, which for a player like that, that's actually kind of worrisome, for all of his talents,
And it isn't his first one, right? I mean, he's had multiples.
So John Wall, it's unclear if he'll be ready for opening day. So yeah, if it takes him a couple of weeks to get back on his feet to start the season, that right there, they could stumble. And Ian Mahinmi is going to be out a couple months. So in both cases, two of their better players aren't going to be around to start. And if we don't think anybody else has improved, which we don't, I agree with that.
Plus, I wasn't a big fan of Randy Whitman, but I don't actually think Scotty Brooks is an upgrade. So it's not like I think coaching is going to make a big difference here either.
We've left at Scott Brooks for years. All right, this team just seemed freaking snubbed. The Charlotte Hornets, 41.5 over under. You bet the over, and you gave them a good shot to win the division. Those,
Right.
I mean, that just seems like the Vegas just like the price wasn't there for Vegas. Like it looked
I don't
like
understand. I honestly don't understand this. So they won 48 games last year. They've lost Jeremy
tied for the division.
Yeah, they lost Jeremy Lin, Al Jefferson, and Courtney Lee. Those are the big names that they lost. But if you look at the numbers, Al Jefferson just wasn't very good. Jeremy Lin was okay, whatever. He's not really good, but also not stinking terrible. Courtney Lee was fairly decent. But then you remember, oh yeah, there's this guy named Michael Kidd Gilchrist who was actually really good and on the path to becoming a star player, and we're going to have him back for a full season. So I think he's going to more than make up for those losses. They have a couple of other young players who are going to improve. And I mean, there aren't really a ton of bad players on the roster. It's kind of reminds me of the Nuggets teams that we had 6, 7, 8 years ago, where it's just like, well, everybody on the roster kind of looks above average. There's no superstars, but everybody looks good.
Oh, I got to mention one player. They picked up Batum this season. Let's not forget about him.
Oh, well, he was there last year.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah,
well,
he was
he hurt though, or
okay? No, he was there.
No, he was great. He was great. Yeah, that's why he's
and
part
we
of why they
expect him to continue to be great. This is like
if
I had to pick the number for them, it would be exactly the same number as last year. It'd be 48. So this seems like the dumbest over on the books.
How does a team win 48 wins with young players, right? Because a lot of their talent is young, and then not get the respect
because people think Al Jefferson was very important to their success, and he left.
I'm glad that actually paid off, because we had a few years like actually Paul George in Indiana where they lost some good players. We were like, oh, they're going to get worse. Well, this is going to be such easy money. People aren't going to realize it. Then a star got injured, and we had to compensate. All right, we've only got a couple more to get through. The Brooklyn Nets over under at 22.5. I haven't even looked at this. Is it just they can't be that bad?
This is a they can't be that bad bit. So what it boils down to with the Nets is they are bad. Let's be sure. They are bad. But the thing is, they're not bad because they have a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds players. They're bad because they have a bunch of journeymen, right? They have a bunch of guys with 6, 7, 8, 9 years of experience on their roster, a bunch of guys who are all going to be playing for contracts in other teams, so they're going to try hard. But they're also guys who, there are going to be nights where, like, this team plays against Minnesota and Karl Anthony Towns has to sit out to nurse a sore quad or something like that. And since Minnesota's a team full of 20-year-olds and this is a team full of 27-year-olds, they're going to just destroy that team, because that's what just happens sometimes with the kids make stupid mistakes and don't play NBA basketball, right? The veterans kind of are there and they're solid and they play good NBA basketball. They're going to be nights like that. And they don't own their own draft picks, so there's no reason for management to try any tanking here. There's no reason for any shenanigans to go on. So, come February and March, they're going to win games against the other teams that have no reason to win, because they're going to have teams full of players playing really hard to get their next NBA contract. The other teams are going to have teams full of draft picks that are kind of sick of losing and in the doldrums of the season and don't really want to play that hard. So we're going to sweat it all year, but they're going to eke out 25 wins.
Yeah, and I have no complaints with that. I was looking over that. Yeah, they like Jeremy Lin. They picked up. They have some decent players, and I love the tanking point. I forgot to bring this up to the Lakers. That was an irrational thing they had last year, right? That I was complaining about, which is, they had this trade in the works with Philadelphia, where if they didn't get the top 3 pick, their draft pick was top 3 protected. They had this incentive to be one of the top 3 worst teams in the NBA. Or they had to give up their draft pick, and I would rather have development to young stars than get a top 3 draft pick. But, we've talked about the irrationality of teams before. As you pointed, we've seen teams make irrational decisions around draft picks before, but luckily the Nets don't have to. All right, the next one. This one, by the way, I see as you're going to be so freaking right that it's just a joke and it'll be obvious by the All-Star break, or you're going to be so wrong that we just get to tear this paper up in 2 months. Luckily, the price was just set to make it at that point, which is the Chicago Bulls over under at 40.5. This team's going to be great, or this team's going to be a train wreck. There is no in between. But I like the bet.
So the thing about this is part one of the gamble is that Derrick Rose was awful last year. Like, we're talking worst player in the NBA caliber awful. Just absolutely atrocious. And a lot of people agreed that Derrick Rose is not the player he used to be, but it seems like people are very slow to catch on to the fact that it's much worse than that. He's just downright terrible. I don't care what effect he has on the spacing or whatever. He's an awful player because he's not the player he used to be, and even despite that, he still shoots as many shots as that old player who could make them. So he just shoots your team out of games every night. Now, it's possible some kind of miracle medicine is going on and he'll become good for the Knicks, but whatever they replace that awful production from last year with, it doesn't really matter if they get the good Rajon or the bad Rajon Rondo. He's going to be an upgrade. So that's part one of the gamble. Part two of the gamble is, they lost Noah and Powell, and they were both pretty good bigs, and that's going to hurt a little. But we love Robin Lopez. We've been a big Robin Lopez fan since his days in Portland. Seriously, the people in Chicago are going to love this guy. He's going to become a fan favorite. He's just a really good big. And what's really good about him and is really necessary on this roster of all rosters is he does not need the ball to be good. He doesn't need the ball at all. He'll just do putbacks. He'll suck up rebounds. He does not need to have the ball run through him at all to be effective. And on a roster with Rondo and Wade and Butler, that's a big deal. Then you got Bobby Portis, who we kind of like. We liked him in college, and I like the chances of him having a sort of a year where he starts to figure it out and becomes productive. So this is a big gamble on Wade's knees, and then there's big questions on who's going to shoot on this team. They might have some serious spacing issues, but they just have too many good players for us to not take the over.
Well, what I'll say about them, and this leads into the last pick that we'll talk, because we already talked the Warriors, but is that last season the Bulls won 42 games, and we think they shuffled some stuff, but losing Powell for Robin Lopez, but they lost Derrick Rose for Rajon Rondo. Side note on that, I don't understand the hate of Rajon Rondo. Well, the perpetual optimism in Derrick Rose, it seems very odd. So
it does seem weird, yeah.
But yeah, just the point is, if you think the team is at bare minimum held steady with last season and they beat the over-under last season for what you bet on, then it's a great bet. And the Bulls are in that shape. They were above 40. They were above 40.5 last season. I think all of their moves at bare minimum are a push. And so it'll just boil down to, locker room synergy if things implode. Last bet, same as I just said, the Memphis Grizzlies under at 40 of 43 that you bet on. That just seems like a no-brainer to me, because I think last season, I think they were 40-something. They squeaked into the playoffs, if I recall, I think at 44 wins or 43,
right,
something
but
like
last season they had epic injuries. I think they set all kinds of records for a number of injury games missed, right? So there's a little bit. So they did underperform themselves a little bit last year. On the other hand, this roster is really old, right? You got Zach Randolph, who's, what is he, 85? I don't know.
Yeah.
You got Tony Allen's in his 13th season, I think. It's a really old roster. And the thing about NBA players don't age like wine, they age like milk. And the thing about how milk ages is it's fine until that day when it's not, Tuesday night, you're having a little bit of milk in your cereal and it's fine. And then Wednesday morning, holy shit, does my fridge stink?
Can I give one weird argument back that it's like a stock market term that does seem to be true of some players in the NBA? There does seem to be a dead cat bounce to some stars in the NBA. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had it, Shaq had it, Kobe Bryant had it. But it is like, even in the best case scenario, I'm not expecting a dead cat bounce out of like 4 old players.
You got their best player is coming off an Achilles injury, and those injuries are the worst, right? You got a lot of old players. I think this roster is like really just it's held together by like glue and pieces of gum. It's just ready to shatter. And if it starts to shatter, if there's even a hint that things aren't going well, I feel like management's just going to blow it all up.
They've actually done that in the past. It's been odd to me where they've made some.
So if it starts off and they go let's say they go 10-12, they're going to blow it all up, and that team's going to win 30 games tops.
All right. Well, you've got a 7:30 cutoff, so we got through all the things. I'm just going to say.
Can't believe we made it.
I was going to say I had an article on some just tropes that I like. We named lots of stuff. The theme I would just give is people don't accept the limitations of their perception was like the three I put up today, but check them out. Let me know if I should add any more in the comments. I'm going to go over all of your past articles, Patrick, and consolidate them at some point. But anyway, and I'll lead us to shout outs. If you don't have any, Patrick, that's cool. You can hop off. The two I'll give, one is a commenter, Papa Carr, for last week on last week's show, which Andrew Sutton was on, who did note that we did jump into the argument that Serge Ibaka seemed older, and we kind of went for one of these persistent, I don't want to say necessarily myths, but these persistent tropes that stick around, that is international players lie about their age. And he actually called us on it, that, is kind of being almost racist, which I agree with. So I'm going to apologize for that. You're right. There are lots of, as Popcar says, there are lots of reasons players can get worse. Ibaka has gotten worse. There's no reason to try and go for like negative stereotypes for why. I'll give some major shout out to Art, who seems to be really great on putting comments on my top 10 list. So thanks for that. And then I'm actually going to say, I'm forgetting the author's name. I'll try and look this up quickly. But I'm listening to a fantastic ebook or a fantastic audiobook right now by Blake J. Harris, who's actually helps out on the How Did This Get Made podcast. It's called Console Wars. It's about the Nintendo Sega console wars. It is a fantastic read. It is gripping. So check that out if you haven't. Those are my shout outs. And yeah, Patrick, if you got any, I'll let you say them and you can head
I just got one shout out. I don't know if you watched Saturday Night Live this weekend, but I thought Leslie Jones' segment on how she's handled the situation with being hacked and with the Twitter trolls was a truly hilarious segment. It's one of the most that was one of the best episodes of SNL I've seen in a long time, but that particular segment was fantastic. There's a link to it. You might have to sort of squint, but there's a link to it in my article on the Boxscore Geeks portfolio as well.
Yeah, I was impressed you didn't go for. Yeah, everybody's been talking Tom Hanks. Yeah, that had to have been a pretty strong episode.
It was a really great show, and the Tom Hanks. Oh, the Black Jeopardy bit was amazing as well, I thought. But my favorite bit was Leslie Jones' skit, and I think, like, given the shit she had to put up with on Twitter, I think it's kind of amazing how she's handled it with such humor and grace.
Awesome.
So that's my shout out.
Everyone, check it out. Brian, you got any?
Yeah, real fast. Well, first of all, I have enjoyed Alec Baldwin and Kate McKinnon as Trump and Hillary Clinton in the past 3 weeks. That's been pretty funny, too. But my shout out, just real fast, is really sad esports news. The Kespa Pro League has discontinued after 14 years. It's the end of an era. In addition to that, the 5 main teams have also shut down. And the recent champ, Degenerate Green Wings, is still around, but SKT1, KT Rolster, Samsung Galaxy, CJNS, and MVP are all shutting down their StarCraft 2 squads. Esports existed before Pro League, but it really marked the beginning of modern big money corporate financing and broadcasting of events. It turned players like Slayers, Box, and Nada into huge pop stars, even outside of gaming in Korea. And this was all the way back in 2002. So yeah, rip in peace, the Casper Pro League for StarCraft. We'll miss it.
But wait, you forgot an important bit that probably, and maybe it's just a coincidence, but this comes right on the heels of an American winning at the Casper Pro League for the first time ever. Shout out to Neeb for winning that.
That's right.
He just completely dominated competition.
That's what everyone said, that he retired all of Korean StarCraft, but I think it's a coincidence more than anything. You know how corporate decisions go, right? They decided this months ago.
An American won the Casper Pro League for the first time. Go USA!
Yeah, one of the craziest feats and one of the saddest things happened at the same time. It's kind of weird, but that's how it goes. So that's all my shout-outs, Dre.
Well, awesome. Enjoy the, NBA is back tomorrow or today, depending on when you're listening to this show. So definitely enjoy that. This has been the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you found us not through the website, we are at boxscoregeeks.com. You can subscribe on Stitcher and iTunes, the Boxscore Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote, helps us out. As I mentioned the last couple of weeks, we are on Facebook and Twitter, Boxscore Geeks. I'm trying to be more social media savvy this year, so like us there too. It definitely helps out. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. Looks like 9:30 p.m. Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, depending on availability. And if you miss those, you can catch the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.
Go Timberwolves!